You're watching the History Fella channel, and in this video we're looking at Martin van Buren. Martin van Buren was born on December the 5th, 1782, and would die on July the 24th, 1862. Van Buren was an American lawyer and statesman who served as the 8th President of the United States from 1837 to 1841. A primary founder of the Democratic Party, he served as New York's Attorney General, U.S. Senator, and then briefly as the 9th Governor of New York, before joining Andrew Jackson's administration as the 10th United States Secretary of State, Minister to Great Britain, and ultimately the 8th Vice President when named Jackson's running mate for the 1832 election. Van Buren won the presidency in 1836, lost re-election in 1840, and failed to win the Democratic nomination in 1844. Later in his life, Van Buren emerged as an elder statesman and an important anti-slavery leader who led the Free Soil Party ticket in the 1848 presidential election. Van Buren was born in Kinderhook, New York, where most residents were of Dutch descent and spoke Dutch as their primary language. He was the first president to have been born after the American Revolution, in which his father served as a patriot. He is the only president to have spoken English as a second language. Trained as a lawyer, he entered politics as a member of the Democratic Republican Party, won a seat in the New York State Senate, and was elected to the United States Senate in 1821. As the leader of the Bucktails faction, Van Buren emerged as the most influential politician from New York in 1820 and established a political machine known as the Albany Regency. Following the 1824 presidential election, Van Buren sought to re-establish a two-party system with partisan differences based on an ideology rather than personalities or sectional differences. He supported Andrew Jackson's candidacy in the 1828 presidential election with this goal in mind. He ran successfully for governor of New York to support Jackson's campaign, but resigned shortly after Jackson was inaugurated so he could accept appointment as Jackson's Secretary of State. In the cabinet, Van Buren was a key Jackson advisor and built the organisational structure for the coalition Democratic Party. He ultimately resigned to help resolve the Petticoat affair and briefly served as an ambassador to Great Britain. At Jackson's behest, the 1832 Democratic National Convention nominated Van Buren for vice president, and he took office after the Democratic ticket won the 1832 presidential election. With Jackson's strong support and the organisational strength of the Democratic Party, Van Buren successfully ran for president in the 1836 presidential election, defeating several Whig opponents. However, his popularity soon eroded because of his response to the Panic of 1837, which centred on his independent treasury system, a plan under which the federal government of the United States would store its funds in vaults rather than in banks. More conservative Democrats and Whigs in Congress ultimately delayed his plan from being implemented until 1840. His presidency was further marred by the costly Second Seminole War and his refusal to admit Texas to the Union as a slave state as an attempt to avoid heightened sectional tensions. In 1840, Van Buren lost his re-election bid to William Henry Harrison, the nominee of the anti-Jackson Whig Party. Van Buren was initially the leading candidate for the Democratic Party's nomination again in 1844, but his continued opposition to annexation of Texas angered Southern Democrats, leading to the nomination of James K. Polk. Growing opposed to slavery, Van Buren was the newly formed Free Soil Party's presidential nominee in 1848, and his candidacy helped Whig nominee Zachary Taylor defeat Democrat Lewis Cass. Worried about sectional tensions, Van Buren returned to the Democratic Party after 1848, but was disappointed with the pro-Southern presidencies of Franklin Pierce and James Buchanan. He supported the policies of President Abraham Lincoln, a Republican, during the American Civil War. He died of asthma at his home in Kinderhook, New York, on July the 24th, 1862, aged 79. While Van Buren is praised for his anti-slavery stances, in historical rankings, historians and political scientists often rank Van Buren as an average or below average US president due to his handling of the Panic of 1837.